We're in a building called the Town and Gown Building that was built in the 1920s. Then President Rufus B. von Kleinschmidt's wife raised the money for this building. If you have time, there's a beautiful lobby out here with a fireplace, but no fire today. It's a little too warm. There are restrooms upstairs off of the lobby, so that takes care of some of that important business. USC is a school with many firsts. It has the first medical school in Southern California. It's been first in NCAA sports many, many times, including football, but we're not going to be there this year, unfortunately. Our big game against UCLA is coming up this weekend. They're both nationally ranked, USC and UCLA, so that should be quite a game. The schedule for this, the third Maritime Risk Symposium, has been set so that there are long breaks in between, long breaks, 25-minute breaks or so, between the sessions. And the idea is that we feel that one of the important outputs of this symposium is the networking that goes on. So I don't want to see you reading your emails or checking the stock market. You got to get out there and talk to people and meet people that are your counterparts in other organizations and are doing the same kind of work. I also hope that you will have a few minutes to look around campus. The center of campus is just west of here, about 1 block, and maybe half a block north. And there you'll find the iconic statue of a Trojan. We call him Tommy Trojan. Also a statue of the horse Traveler, who is our mascot, our official mascot, and runs around the stadium every time USC scores a touchdown. So some weekends it gets a good workout. USC is also known for things like the Cinema School, and the Cinema School is on the north side of campus and somewhat west of here. And if you go up, the buildings are just beautiful. There was a large gift from George Lucas that allowed us to construct the Cinema School, which is internationally known as the finest cinema school any place. And when you walk into that building, it's like being on the set of Cleopatra or being in a 5-star hotel in Las Vegas. It's quite amazing for a university campus building. So we're proud of the campus. It has a lot of fountains on it now. This is something that's occurred just during the term of our previous president. And he took it upon himself to beautify the campus by putting in these water features. That was Steve Stamples. And what's happened is the campus is basically a half-mile square. And it has increased. When I was an undergraduate here, it was like 14,000 students. And now there are 38,000 students. Half of them graduate students, half of them undergraduate students. So it's the largest traditional private university in the United States. When I say traditional, there are some for-profit schools like University of Phoenix. They claim to have 100,000 students, but they don't really have a campus. They have just rented buildings places. So in terms of a traditional university, this is the largest private school in the United States. Another first is that the Department of Homeland Security, after the 9/11 event, established the Office of University Programs. We have the director here, Matt Clark. Matt, want to raise your hand? Okay, thank you. This was done because of an insertion in the budget of a request for $40 million by then President George W. Bush. And there was a competition held to establish the first center. Some 70 universities formed consortia and applied for the first grant to establish the center, and USC prevailed. And this was the start of CREATE, the Center for Risk and Economic Analysis of Terrorism Events. And we've become a pretty successful center, at least we think so. And one of the reasons we have been successful is that we have forged links between ourselves and operating agencies. We work with the harbors of Long Beach and Los Angeles. We work with the airport, LAX, Los Angeles World Airports. We work with CalEMA, our emergency management agency in the governor's office. This allows us to place our students into internships or into research positions where there are real problems to solve. We find out about those problems, we work cooperatively with various agencies. It gives us this extended research laboratory that just cannot be duplicated on a university campus. So we're very interested in building these cooperative arrangements and expanding them. One of our biggest partners has been the U.S. Coast Guard. We've not only had 2 of these maritime risk symposiums, but we also have a project that you'll hear about later on scheduling on the water patrols. It actually started, the idea, the concept, started at LAX and has expanded out to Federal Air Marshals and to the Coast Guard. We're now doing the LA Metropolitan Transit, our light rail and subway systems. So that's a little bit about CREATE. If there's some way we can get together and work cooperatively on a project that's important to you and has some research academic content, because we're a university and our job is to create knowledge. If there's some way we can work with you, we want to hear about it, and we want you to grab my arm or our director for research, Isaac Maya. Isaac, where's your hand there? Just tell us, just feed us those ideas and we'll see what we can do with them. Well, as the screen up there says, the title of this symposium is Reducing Costs and Increasing Effectiveness in the Maritime Environment. Our first speaker is Admiral Robert Parker. Vice Admiral Robert C. Parker assumed duties as commander of the Coast Guard Atlantic area in April of 2010, where he serves as the operational commander for all U.S. Coast Guard missions within a geographic region that ranges from the Rocky Mountains to the Gulf of Arabia. Spans 5 Coast Guard districts and some 40 states. So for those of you who are not Coast Guard people, that's the way the Coast Guard divides up the world. There's 2 halves, an Atlantic half and a Pacific half. And the Atlantic half goes all the way from the Rocky Mountains to basically the middle of Asia. Before assuming command of the Atlantic area, Admiral Parker served as U.S. Command's first Director of Security and Intelligence in Miami, Florida. As the first Coast Guard officer to serve as a director in any DoD command, he directed U.S. military operations and intelligence efforts and coordinated interagency operations in the Caribbean and Central and South America. Vice Admiral Parker was promoted to a flag rank in July of 2006 and immediately assigned to serve as Assistant Commander for Capabilities in Washington, D.C., responsible for identifying and providing service-wide capabilities, competencies, and capacities, and for developing staffing and training standards, and for equipping, sustaining, maintaining, and employing Coast Guard forces. He has over 12 years of sea duty, including 3 commands: the Cape Hedge in Morro Bay, the Tahoma in New Bedford, and the Mellon in Seattle. He was charged with conducting search and rescue operations during the winter crab fishing season. We all know the most dangerous, what is it, the most?
Deadliest catch.
Yeah. He was responsible for counter drug law enforcement, migrant operations, and fisheries enforcement in the North Pacific, Gulf of Alaska, North Atlantic, Caribbean, and Eastern Pacific. His assignments ashore have included Operations Center Duty Officer for the 12th Coast Guard District, Pacific Area in Alameda, California. Security Assistance Liaison Officer in Monrovia, Liberia. Professional Development Branch Chief at the Coast Guard Academy. Chief, Pacific Area Operational Forces Branch in Alameda. Chief of Operations, 11th Coast Guard District in Alameda. And Chief of Staff, 13th Coast Guard District in Seattle. Vice Admiral Parker is a 1979 graduate of the United States Coast Guard Academy. Additionally, he holds a Master of Arts degree in National Security and Strategic Studies from the U.S. Naval War College. He also completed a 1-year National Security Fellowship at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University in 1999. His awards include a Defense Superior Service Medal, 2 Legions of Merit, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, 4 Meritorious Service Medals, the 9/11 Medal, 2 Coast Guard's Commendation Medals, the Coast Guard Achievement Medal, and various other personal and unit awards. So join me in welcoming Admiral Parker.
Thanks, Steve. Good morning. I'm still on East Coast time, so I'm ready for lunch. I know some of you think that this is an early start to the day, and if you're in academia, getting up at this hour is really a special torture. So I appreciate that. And whenever I hear these introductions, I always think like I should record it and send it home to my mom, who is 90 now, because that stuff just kind of goes past her. I'm still the little boy who threw stuff in the high chair when I was 2 years old to a lot of people. But thank you so much for the warm introduction, and such a wonderful place here. Good to know a little bit more about it. I hope to see more of it while I'm here, and to speak to this distinguished group about a topic I care a lot about, where we talk about risk management, risk mitigation, and resilience as well. Now, there's a lot of people in the room here that I actually know. And this is curious to me, because normally I know the people, the blue suiters, more than I know others, but I think I know at least as many civilians in the room now as I do blue suiters, and especially since I'm on the wrong coast. As he said, my smarter and better looking brother from another mother, and if you're texting that, it's a Sable B fam. But Paul Zukunft is my counterpart here, so we're watching our back all the time. It's not because of terrorists, it's because if they take us out, the opportunity for promotion goes up dramatically in the service. So we'll be looking over our shoulder here pretty much all through the next 2 days. But we're excited to be here. So many great folks here. Isaac, great to see you. We've talked on VTCs and on phones before, so it was really great to get out here and put a real face to the name as well. And we've got a number of other folks, not just here, but if you go up the coast just a little bit to Monterey here. David Alderson up at Naval Postgraduate School, we've done a lot of work with. Had a pleasure to host him out in Norfolk as well. David Ebert Dr. David Ebert from Vaccine. Now, there's a lot of doctors in the house. It makes you feel a little inadequate sometimes, but I'm okay. I'll get through this. But throughout this symposium, there's a lot of people who are here that I think are just really, really helpful to us as we go along and been great partners. Now, there's a lot of other folks at these tables here too. Some of these retired admirals that I say I worked for. I would say they were in my chain of command. You can ask them whether I worked for them or not. But Tim Sullivan, good to see you here. Great to see you, and Teresa last night. And Gene Brooks, who's kind of a neighbor in Norfolk anyway, working with Maris, and still very much involved in all things Coast Guard and the Maritime, as you'll see. So throughout this symposium, you're going to hear from a lot of interesting folks. The Deputy Undersecretary for S&T will be here. He's not here just yet, so we'll let that introduction stand for just a minute. And I was really hoping Steve Flynn was going to be here, but he fetched up sick, which we hope he gets recovered and well here very quickly. But I know we've got a number of great speakers, and I'm really excited that you have long break times, and those are long break times in my world, to get together and really network during the breaks and continue on into the social hours later as we talk through this. So I keep hearing we hear ourselves say that the U.S. is a maritime nation. It's true. I mean, 95% of the stuff by volume that we import and export goes by sea. It's about 2/3 if you do it by the value. But those numbers belie a number of things, like $700 billion of U.S. gross domestic product every year that comes from the maritime environment, the 51 million U.S. jobs, and the components that make up this thing, deep draft channels, intercoastal waterways, buoys, bridges, intermodal connections, barges, ships, locks, oil terminals, container yards, offshore drilling platforms, so many other pieces that really constitute the various organs of this vital system which is the lifeblood of our nation's economy. Now, ensuring this system remains strong and resilient is crucial to our nation's ability to guarantee our freedoms, our way of life, and democratic governance. Basic risk principles acknowledge that a system with an established heightened degree of resilience lowers the risk of attack by adversaries with malicious intents and means. This morning I'll be seeking your continued support. I really want to continue this on, and I'm excited by the energy in the room, not just from Dr. Lorenzo, to ensure we continue to maximize resilience. He has a lot of energy, if you haven't figured this out yet. To ensure we continue to maximize resilience, the other R word that we strive for, while simultaneously improving our ability to detect, deter and defeat threats from the maritime vector. Now, over the past couple of weeks, we've been a little busy, as you might guess, with that date with Sandy. During this time, we witnessed the fragility of our systems and the importance of resilience as this superstorm devastated coastal New York and New Jersey. More than 100 citizens lost their lives. The count this morning was up to 119. Millions of residents went without power for an extended period of time, heat or water supplies for several days. Some are still without all of those things. And commercial shipping in one of our country's largest seaports came to an unusual and an abrupt halt. Now, the Coast Guard, along with several other federal, state, and local agencies and partners, played a large role in the response and the eventual recovery of the impacted region. And while resetting the critical waterways and navigation systems was an important frontline component, it was merely just one piece of a much larger, complex recovery of a system. Ultimately, the system was driven towards, among other things, precise and full restoration of energy production and fuel delivery to end consumers. And as you may have noticed, it happened during an election, which makes things even a little more exciting when you're trying to work it from the inside. And this effort is, if you're in the maritime world and you step out of that world, this effort is largely unappreciated except when it's absent. And it's tough budget climates like the ones we're in now that signal a clarion call for the efficiencies and more effective employment of the scarce resources to sustain this trend of quiet confidence that we've engendered over the years. Now, Superstorm Sandy was like Katrina in that it was like a weapon of mass effect without malicious or criminal intent. That's a paraphrase of something Admiral Allen used after Katrina when he was in charge of that recovery effort. Now, this significant disruption still tested our ability to prepare and respond to a catastrophic event and exposed the strengths and weaknesses in our maritime transportation system, our regulatory oversight of the same, and our collective talents to innovate before, during, and after the event. In the aftermath of Sandy, as with many past catastrophic events, our long-standing relationships with the private sector, port partners, and local maritime stakeholders were crucial to guiding response operations towards swift and effective results. And while these relationships with our port partners are vital to our emergency response missions, I would argue that our relationship with the academic and maritime operating communities are equally important beforehand, but from a risk context of being able to define, detect, deter, and defeat both persistent and emerging threats in the maritime domain. Now, I'll refer back again to Sandy throughout the course of the discussion here this morning and other events and threats, but the eye there is towards identifying ways to work smarter and better together in order to reduce costs and increase effectiveness of maritime operations, whether you're in government or in the private sector. The Coast Guard is uniquely positioned, as you may know, as the nation's only armed service charged with the authorities and missions to effectively deter and mitigate sources that pose risk to our maritime transportation system. Some statistics you may be familiar with. Last year, the Coast Guard responded to 20,510 search and rescue cases, saved over 3,800 lives, seized 75 metric tons of coke and 18 metric tons of marijuana, wrapped up 191 suspected smugglers. We performed over 10,400 annual inspections of U.S. flagged vessels, 6,200 marine casualty investigations, 9,000 port state control and security examinations on foreign flagged vessels, and responded to over 3,000 pollution incidents. Still 200 open incidents just from Sandy alone. These activities cost money, and because they're in the maritime environment, they cost more money. Yet another reason to find the optimum amount of squeeze to produce this particular juice that we're trying to get to here today. Now, unless you haven't turned on your TV or radio or your streaming internet over the past few months of this election season, you know that the nation's leadership in Washington, D.C. is hyper-focused on the economic challenges that we face as a country. The Coast Guard, along with our many federal partner agencies, is charged with finding ways to sustain performance of the many diverse statutory homeland security and marine safety missions in a smarter, faster, and more fiscally responsible manner, one that sustains our capability to safeguard lives, protect the environment, and facilitate safe and secure commerce throughout our maritime transportation system. Now, declining budget environments are not new. This is at least the third major issue that I've seen in the 33 years I've been doing this. But that environment, coupled with the aging assets that we have right now in our inventory, bring us a unique operational challenge. And it illustrates why risk-based decision-making is absolutely a necessity. When the Haiti earthquake hit in 2010, I was the director of operations down at U.S. Southern Command. I've never been more proud of my Coast Guard men and women than sitting in a DoD command and watching the Coast Guard be first responders in an island nation, which has great impact to the stability of the Western Hemisphere. They responded to that 7.0 magnitude quake that killed an estimated 220,000 people and injured 300,000 more with cutters that were on patrol in the region quickly being reassigned, and aircraft and crews that were quickly moved forward. Yet during those relief operations, 10 of our 12 assigned cutters suffered significant mechanical problems, impeding their ability to respond. 3 had to suspend relief activities altogether and leave the area for extensive repairs, and 1 actually went to emergency dry dock. Now, on less urgent missions, this cost of opportunity is completely invisible, but the fragility of this aging part of our inventory came to us in very unflattering ways during this event and this critical time of need. So we're looking for ways to better predict where those failures are going to be and how we can make that case for what the best use of American Treasury tax dollars are. Despite their age, our legacy cutters continue to deliver great value to the American people and to the maritime transportation system. And while I'd continue to argue that an updated and more capable fleet is vital to our ability to continue our missions and contribute to maritime resilience, we must, in the meantime, find a way to more effectively utilize all of our assets and understand the second and third order effects of our decision process. So let's talk about some of the things we're doing together to enable smarter operations in the maritime domain. We've got a little thing we call ORAM. Some of you are familiar with it, the Operational Risk Assessment Model. Basically, this takes all the different missions we do and allows me to take what's called a risk index number and assign a number. It's not perfect, but it's good, that allows me to see across all the different disparate missions. I can take aids to navigation, I can take search and rescue, drug law enforcement, ice breaking, and look at those things in ways that I can compare all those apples and pomegranates to figure out where I'm going to put assets when I know I don't have nearly enough assets to do all those missions at once. And that can be informed by a strategic intent over the top of that. What we're missing there, and you're going to hear this more than once over the next 2 days, is the strategic risk mitigation for the nation and how we do that collectively, and then what our piece of that is in the maritime domain. But this enables the operational commanders like Paul and myself really to compare the effects of and choose from the various resource allocation strategies by combining these quantitative and qualitative theoretical frameworks to calculate and compare risk among these disparate missions. Earlier mentioned partnerships, port and maritime partners specifically. I'd like to turn a little bit more towards the academic side now, and whether it's a university, postgraduate school, corporate think tank, the DHS S&T Centers of Excellence, and some of those things are all connected together. I want to run you down, and you're going to hear more of this later on, but I want to run down some of the exciting and cutting edge projects that we're collaboratively working to push forward. PROTECT. It's an acronym. We love our acronyms. We just can't get away from this stuff. But PROTECT stands for the Port Resiliency for Operational and Tactical Enforcement to Combat Terrorism Model. Yeah, that's why it's an acronym. But this basically adapts a game theory approach to evaluating our adversaries. If you think about what people are going to do to you or could do to you, and then how you do the activities you do in the operational world in which we live in the maritime environment, and then randomize this. We started it up in Boston. Anybody want to guess when the best time to attack the port of Boston was? Wednesday, noon. Training day. Everybody collapsed in, stood down, and all the assets came in off the water. The second best time? Patriots game. Kind of predictable stuff, and you really don't have to watch for very long to pick up on these trends. So, we had a team that looked at this. They went out and they assessed this, and then they figured out sort of what we needed to do. One of the things we needed to do was be more random in our approach, which helps defeat. When you randomize the placement, scheduling, and sequencing of the actions that we take in our security measures, whether it's people or processes or the technology we employ, if we can do that in a smarter way for less money, more juice for that squeeze, it frustrates and complicates any adversary's planning cycles and introduces an uncertainty that may divert that particular attack or that threat off to a different place. It also becomes a force multiplier for us in ways that are very helpful in this time of tight budgetary needs. We're very excited about this. We're moving it off to the Western Rivers. It's coming soon to a port near you, right here. It's just a matter of time before we move this randomization protocol out to a much larger piece. New York City, we found it didn't quite go scale up to that level, but they found so much that they liked with it. And the real test for me, the thing I care about most, is when the operators, the guys and gals driving the boats and walking the piers, come back to us and say, we want more of that, and we want to do that, after we kind of foisted it on them and said, you got to do this. We would think randomization would mess up their schedules. They love it. They absolutely love it. They feel like they're more engaged in what they're doing, and what they're doing makes better sense. So you got to love it when a plan comes together like that. So we're excited about that particular piece and the feedback that we get from that. Now, you should also know that this particular project was just recently awarded the highly coveted Daniel H. Wagner Prize for excellence in ops research practice. And this recognizes, I think, a really wonderful strategic partnership we have between the Coast Guard and CREATE here at USC. Another one we're playing with is DAD. Okay, it's an acronym. Defender, Attacker, Defender. This models the functions of the maritime transportation system. This particular one was interesting, and we see at least one Marine sitting in the room here. The guy who did this was at Naval Postgraduate School. He's a Marine who happened to be from Pittsburgh, or that area up there, and we're looking at how coal moves through the river systems up there and all the different locks and dams and pools and all the different things you got, and then what you have to do to deliver product from one end to the other and what things would frustrate that and what sort of disruptions you would have by taking certain key elements out. Fascinating stuff, scalable, usable in much broader arena to figure out how things would move in general across the maritime domain through an intermodal environment. Just really interesting stuff. So we're excited to see where that goes. We're looking forward to the next iteration of this and where that can take us. But the system resilience measurement that you get out of that was really, really exciting to me. And it was obvious to me about 2 minutes into that brief that this was much bigger than just what this Marine captain was working on, that this had very, very good strategic implications. And the human adversary piece of that, and the human error resulting in Marine casualties and terrorist-related events, and those things that come out of that are really, really challenges that we've got to get our hands around. It's built around a worst-case scenario. It's not in the book, worst-case scenarios, or how to respond to that, although it should be, because I think it was that good. So thank you, David, for the help that we've done on that. Good return on investment, I think, for a very modest investment indeed. CG SARVA, another acronym, you gotta love it. Coast Guard Search and Rescue Visual Analytics. This was a collaborative undertaking with our friends at Purdue University. I'm a very visual person, so this one struck me immediately. But basically this allows us to take heat maps and show where things happen, how they're interconnected, how you might apply resources to that. Specifically in this case, it was up in our Great Lakes region in District 9 to see where small boats could or should be. We placed our small boats up there at the time when you had 25-foot rowing monomoy, so literally you can see from one station to the next. And now all those things have congressional interest. We'll just leave it at that. So it's very hard to scale those things down without a really compelling argument. These are compelling arguments that we've got there. And the really neat part of that is we found much better ways to take more than just boats. You can add the aircraft element to that, response times, what changes with technology. You can look at all the way those things move by adding or subtracting different variables. Very neat stuff. And this has been, it's starting to get a lot of traction in some neat places. When Sandy happened, we actually used this as well to find out, okay, I've lost Station Manasquan. It's completely underwater. They're not going to get power back there probably still for another week. Station New York was completely inundated. The piers are gone. I don't know where the fuel pier is at Sandy Hook. We still haven't found that. You would think a pier would be something easy to keep track of. Not so much. So when you look at where these areas are denied, you can go back into the data, use the same model, same algorithms to find out sort of where you're at risk, and then we move patrol boats into those zones on the backfill, and then the larger cutters came in to do the patrol boat missions. We just sort of collapsed in on ourselves based on where the historical data was, and we were able to meet mission at least adequate levels at a time when we were very much in a denied environment and we're still trying to rebuild in some places where we've got coasties that don't have houses to live in. Really extraordinary stuff and very helpful to us. And what started out as a programmatic thing, very quickly we'll look at it as an operator because we're in the world of do the best you can with what you got. So that became very easily for us something to grab hold of and take advantage of. So thank you, David, for a wonderful, wonderful opportunity there. And he's assembled quite a team up there, and now that he's got, you know, espresso when I show up at the place, I'm ready to go. Now, Katrina and Sandy had some very interesting comparative notes. There's actually, if you listen to the folks from NOAA and from the National Hurricane Center, even though Sandy was a Category 1 when it came ashore, there was more energy because of the size of the storm and because of the geography that you had there. There was actually more energy involved in this storm as it came ashore. The other thing that happened was the passage of time, and we actually learned some lessons for a change instead of just observing them. So these lessons learned really came out into some pretty helpful places. So when you compare the two, I'd like to focus a little bit on partnerships. In Katrina, the local port partners worked very, very hard to reconstitute the Port of New Orleans and the nearby ports, but the nationwide success was limited due to a lack of strategic collaboration. And this is my humble opinion at the national level. The lack of a common operating picture and a broader embracing of the national maritime transportation system. This was very much a regional event, and then was made sort of hyper-local by some of the politics that overlaid that. That's going to happen wherever you go. That's just part of the dynamic you have to learn to live with. But the recovery efforts were limited to that regional geography and the local knowledge associated with that. We created a niche task force led by Coast Guard at the time to identify effective pathways towards a national recovery, but the strategic networks of collaboration were just non-existent at the time. Cargo streams could have easily moved other places if we were there. And the things that frustrated that was both private industry and the Coast Guard and the other regulatory agents were not suited to push people in a very agile way to wherever that cargo would get diverted, depending on what sector it was. And we've gotten smarter about that, both government and private. So we suffered from an overall lack of understanding of cargo streams, risk awareness, economic modeling solutions, et cetera. And the comms from local stakeholders and national policymakers were stifled by antiquated knowledge management methods. One of the things I've come very clear to learn as I've dealt with the Haiti earthquake when I left Southcom, that response to that was still going on in April of 2010. As I was driving up 95 to this job, the Macondo well blew out. As soon as I got there, I had deja vu all over again, seeing how we brief the national command structure on information that has to go very quickly from the tactical up to the strategic level of the organization. It doesn't have time to pass through whatever wiring diagram you've created. You've got to have information, and it's got to turn into knowledge which has to be the same and consistent throughout, or you lose credibility, which really undermines your ability to do the goodness that we want to do collectively. So in Sandy, we made noteworthy improvements. First of all, we recognized the tactical challenges early on through a better and more efficient knowledge management process. Now, we have an improved common operating picture. I'm not happy with it yet. My staff will tell you that in great clarity. But this stuff is hard. It's very, very hard. And when you scale it from the local level, where you get rid of people making spreadsheets to do their job for information that is in a database somewhere that has an authoritative source, this becomes really problematic when you can't bring it up to the national level, and everything looks different when you compile it up to the top. We're smarter about that now. We asserted leadership in national and strategic framework, in the national response framework, to gather appropriate stakeholders and establish an effective, in this case, energy and fuel delivery task force. When they stood up an energy task force at FEMA, I quickly said, we got to get in on that, because all that stuff that goes through that particular emergency support function, we've seen this drill before. We saw it in New Orleans, we've seen it in Florida. Really, really important, especially in the winter, to get home heating oil, fuel, power on, et cetera. That became the long pole in the tent. We knew this. Gave a little impetus to that, put some key people into there, tied in this thing we call the Maritime Transportation System Recovery Unit, which is a standing body. Any of the folks in our organization that wear the marine safety device will tell you this has been a pretty cool thing, and this one really proved its worth. This is built from an Area Maritime Security Committee or a Harbor Safety Committee. They're people that know each other, they deal with each other all the time, their numbers are programmed in each other's phones. They just know how to get along and make things work, and they know the port well. So when it comes down to a denied environment where you have container facilities out, you got loose containers, you got ships aground, you got buoys blowing off station, you got shoaling, you got missing piers, what comes first is a conversation that has to be had. The fact that that body was already assembled before the storm came ashore and sort of looked at, best guess of where that stuff was going to go, they were already working the problem at the height of the storm to know what the first, second, third, fourth, fifth things were going to be as we opened the port of New York. And there was some noise at the front end of that, but as you saw, that was not the long pole in the tent. Getting the lights and power back on was one of the issues that we had. So we're smarter in that regard too, so I'm very, very proud of those folks. We identified 12 key facilities. If you focus on all things, you focus on nothing. There were 12 key facilities that really got the mass of what you needed to get out of disaster mode and into recovery mode very, very quickly, and to facilitate the waterborne fuel cargoes to shoreside recipients was very, very interesting. We could move it around the port. There was no place to deliver it. You could get container ships into the port, but if you couldn't get the workers to the container terminals, it's just like having, it doesn't matter how the event happened. These lessons that we learned here are key. The difference here is in a no-notice event, you don't know where it's going to happen or when it's going to happen. Here we at least had time to withdraw, so our first responders were at least mostly protected, and they could swoop back in after the event. In the next event, where it's a no-notice event, in a place that we don't know, you're probably going to lose all your first responders as well, so you just have to kind of kick it up one more notch as you do that as well. But we're very, very proud of the work that the folks have done here to get us back in business. We also adjusted, not just operationally, but we adjusted some regulatory and legal postures to facilitate resilience while surging the federal oversight. to ensure the guarantee of the standards. Now, standards should change in a disaster, in my humble opinion. You can't, the people who do this every day want to go out there and say there's a little hole in your fence here so you're not an approved facility anymore if you're it's a regulated facility. You have to look at that differently. You've already got a disaster all around you. You can't stand and look at this one thing and apply a different standard in order to get things moving. At some point you'll collect that back up, but you have to be willing to relax those standards in ways that are very, very helpful to getting things moving again in the maritime transportation system, and I'm proud that we were able to do that. So good enough became the standard to get the goods and services flowing, and we'll get back to the full compliance as time gets there. Jones Act waivers, MITSA regulations at regulated terminals, 46 CFR compliance regimes. On passenger vessels, we had folks riding the ferries that rode out the storms to make sure they were safe to go on for the first transit. They were looking at the terminals on both ends. They were looking at security on the terminals, understanding where weaknesses were. We still let people flow because you have to do that in order to get life returned to normal. And then the U.S. Merchant Mariner licensing extensions. A lot of places that do the licensing exams were underwater. So a lot of those records were gone, and the access to the electronic records was gone because we didn't have power. And then things like our Rescue 21 system, our backbone for communications, the servers for that is all at the South Battery in New York. It's an A zone. So it was all completely flooded. So we went several days without any backup there at all, and it kicked out citywide as well in the city of New York, which is their primary sort of 911 response system. So when I got up there 2 days after the storm, I found people in our command center in the dark with laptops, flashlights with a little head flashlight thing on their personal cell phone. It was only AT&T that worked. Verizon, not so much. Can you hear me now? It didn't happen for about a week up there, and that was a major carrier up there. So the amount of denied environment that we dealt with for that particular storm, I think was just not seen in the national reporting. Listen, some of you, I know Julie lived up there in the one area that still had lights, but it really was extraordinary to demonstrate the value of the partnerships that we had, the pre-existing things that we had, the lessons that we had learned before, and how collaboration can be crucial and is crucial to improved effectiveness and efficiencies. So I need to leverage the strategic academic partnerships as well with our local operations. Now, hopefully I've been at least able to illustrate some of the importance of how strong partnerships can lead to improved operations and better management of risk. I'd like to urge all of us here today to continue finding ways to leverage our collective efforts to identify efficiencies and enhance operations both at the strategic and the tactical levels. We're getting pretty good at the tactical stuff, and we're using tactical things that help us understand surge. There's a number of different models, whether it's ADCIRC or the one that Julie, I'm going to see that soon, can tell us in terms of what to do to withdraw from an area or what the effects are going to be. But the risk-based decision making, we're getting better and better at this at the operational level. Where I really need this audience to come together today is at the strategic or enterprise or national level to understand how all these pieces fit together, how we get to national resilience, and how we serve that greater good, mindful of the fact that there are competing interests that enter into that as we go in. So as difficult as all this was, I think the harder part still lies ahead, to get this team to come together for smarter ways to detect, to deter, and defeat an adversary in the future. The ability to collaborate with our academia and our private sector maritime partners really allows my colleagues and the work that I do throughout all levels of the organization to drill in to the operational needs and apply the best minds to providing the best possible solutions. So there's many sources of risk, both persistent and emerging, and among all these there are some common threads that can and should be woven together to provide the best value to maintaining optimal resilience on local, regional, and national scales. We're chipping away at it, like I said, at the operational level. I really, really need us to focus at the strategic level. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I'm excited to be here for a couple of days, and I look forward to your questions and the dialogue over the coming 2 days. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for those informative and timely remarks. We have a little present for you, a memento, and we want to thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Steve. Appreciate it.
We're going to have a short break now, and they'll be moving some tables around because we have two groups of people here. There are the registrants who are the official members of the symposium, and we also have some guests who were here just for the keynote speech. So We shall reconvene at 8:55. Don't forget to mix it up.